It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
Monday morning on Take Command after the preseason has finished on Sunday Night Football. The Commanders won 20-10. That's cool. Winning is better than losing. Yeah. But Logan Paulsen, we are not going to talk a whole lot about the specifics of the game because I would hope that's obvious to everyone listening why we're not going to talk about so much of the specifics of the game. No schematic breakdowns, no inside third down, this or that. We will spend some time, obviously, as we get going here on the players that perhaps made or cost themselves in terms of the roster. But there's a couple of bigger picture things we wanted to talk about first here on Take Command to frame that discussion. And we will talk about in a moment, Logan, weighting, last night's game versus the other games versus what we've seen in practice. And that's going to obviously shape, trying to guess what Adam Peters is going to do in terms of, oh, hey, that guy had a great camp, but a bad finish. What does that mean? So we'll get into that in a moment. But I wanted to start even bigger than that, Logan, as we wrap yet another NFL preseason where fewer and fewer teams are really treating this, the public-facing games, if you will, the ones that are on television opposed to the joint practices, et cetera, with any level of competitiveness, seriousness. And serious isn't the exact right word because it's serious for the guys that are out there. It's serious for the coaches while it's happening. But clearly, they are not valuing the preseason the way that it was, even when you were playing, nevertheless, how it was 25 years ago. And this kind of really hit me hard last night when I got a tweet from, I think it's at DC Pac-Man, who was like, why isn't Emmanuel Forbes playing? And my first instinct was to be like, because haven't you noticed none of the starters are playing? And Emmanuel's a starter, very clearly, on this team. And then I was like, you know what? It's actually a more valid question than that because Emmanuel's a young player they're trying to get more reps. And this is an opportunity to get reps, especially with New England playing their ones last night. And they didn't do that for basically anybody of their starters. 34 players not playing last night. I'd say those 34 all are going to make the team, and yet they don't think any of them could use the extra reps. Don't want to risk the injury, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm just curious for you, Logan, to kind of kick us off here. Like, what do you like? Is this a missed opportunity that teams, not just the Commanders but league wide, are missing, or is preseason actually not that valuable? And maybe there's a reason why teams are doing it this way more and more.
I think preseason is extremely valuable. I think when you look at the first two games specifically, I think you see kind of the reactions coming out of those games and the questions in the media and the answers and the responses. I think that was the first time we kind of got sniffs of Jahan maybe wasn't meeting the standard. And that happened in a preseason game. And obviously that's reflective of what we were seeing in practice, but that's an important element, right? When guys get on the field, it looks a little bit different. It feels a little bit different. And I think you see that in the preseason games. I think also with the Emmanuel Forbes stuff, like coming out of that, kind of how he was able to refocus for the week in Miami. I think all that stuff, the genesis of that is the joint practice with the Jets and then the preseason game. So I think it is valuable. I think it's just what you're using it for. And I think a lot of fans think, like everyone should be playing all the time. And that's kind of what this team did last year. And I don't know if there's a huge benefit to doing that. I think if you've gotten what you've needed to get out of it, then move on. And I think with the 3-game structure and the bye week leading into the season, I think every team is handling it a little bit differently. So, for example, like Carolina didn't play any of their starters until the third preseason game. And so they're ramping for the third preseason game. And then they go. The same thing with New England, right? You kind of ramp, everyone plays, and then you have that bye week to kind of make sure you're right and go from there. So I think it's more of a preference thing. And I think some people are treating it as they would a traditional preseason, but if you think about it, the third game was the game that you'd be really getting after it. And then the bye week would be the next week. So I think it's just preference. I think it's just style. I think it's just, for this team, it seems like they use it as an evaluation tool. And once the evaluation in their minds is kind of finalized, they prioritize the safety of the roster and playing things close to the vest. So,
yeah, I think it's interesting, though, the concept of like, is the preseason just an evaluation tool or is it a preparation tool? Like, is this something that gets you ready for the season in a way that you can't in practice or that enhances what you're doing in practice? And I think the disconnect between maybe where the league is and where fans are is the game planning element of it.
Yeah.
That you are actually getting less out of preseason games. I know that might sound crazy, and I think it might also be position specific too, though, because like you don't get a chance to practice tackling in like tackling to the ground, real tackling, actual other human beings who are trying to make you miss tackles in practice. Like you practice tackling stability balls and dummies and pads, and you rally to the ball but you don't actually finish. Like it's just different. And so defensively I could see like, hey, I want to go chance to practice making some tackles. But I think the lack of specificity in the game plan means the mental preparation side, it's not reminiscent of what you see during a regular season game. And thus, it's at like the quality of practice, and thus the return, or the quality of preparation, thus the return on the investment of time is not worth the risk of injury. And I know that's frustrating for fans because you want to see your guy, like you want to see, hey, how's this guy coming along? Or I just want to watch this guy play football because I'm a fan, and that's what fandom is. But I also, understand it from the team side, and it seems like more and more teams are leaning that way, and the more teams that do it, the more valid it becomes, because you don't get what the Commanders had for an opportunity last night, which was actually playing against New England's ones. Like that could have been more valuable than playing against, obviously their 2s and 3s, but you're still not getting any kind of game plan stuff. So I have to just like defer to you and defer to people in the league to realize like what the gap is between game plan specific type of offense and defense that you're playing against versus these vanilla versions. Cause oh my God, they are very vanilla. But I don't know if there's a way to like quantify it so that folks can understand the difference in preparation level when you're going against a preseason offense versus like a regular season offense if you're a defensive player.
Yeah, I mean, defense or offense, it's the same thing. And so what I will say is what I think they've done here, and a lot of teams do this, especially with new coaching staffs, is you kind of put your vanilla offense in. So one reason you do that is because you want to make sure that you're playing all your cards close to the vest. You want to make sure that you're allowing the athletes on the field to play fast and play physical, and so you can really flesh out your evaluation. We just talked about that. But as a player, I will tell you the most anxiety giving thing in terms of preparation is not who you're playing on the field. It's unscouted looks. It is a nightmare, because so much of what you do in the NFL is you watch film, you find the looks that they run, you find the pressures they bring, you understand the patterns of route combinations, you understand in this look with this tight end set they run this run. And so when you're going up against an opponent, especially week 1, I remember being so stressed, like watching film from 3 years prior of a coordinator trying to figure out like what they might be doing, reading camp reports. Like this is me and like talking with coaches, like we'd read camp reports and be like, oh, they seem to be in a 3-4. It's like, oh, that's a departure from what they did in 2017 or what, I'm saying? It just, yeah. And so I think the schematic advantage of not showing stuff is almost impossible to like quantify. Right, we have an idea of what Joe Witt Jr. is doing, but even what he's done in preseason is pretty drastically different from what he showed in practice. And I'm pretty sure what he showed in practice is even farther removed from what he showed in joint practice. So the version of the defense you're seeing is like literally the bare bones. Now, what you're saying in terms of preparation tool, it's an extremely valuable preparation tool. Like, and in the sense that like going to the stadium, putting on your pads, going through the warm up, it sets the table for the season in a way that nothing else in the preseason does. Like nothing else in the preseason does. And so I do think that there is value there. Now, in terms of saying we want to really see how this cover 3 beater, works against the New England Patriots ones, it's not real. It's not real until it's the game, because they're not running it the way they're going to run it. They don't have all their checks in, because they game plan their cover 3 to match you. So, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's not until the game planning becomes involved, it's not NFL football. It's a preparation tool. It's an evaluation tool for the guys. And I think there's an element of like, you talk about like, we talk a lot about like physical preparedness because of the strength coach stuff that we do on the side. The preseason is an elevation of the offseason. It goes practice, joint practice, preseason game, because the lights are on, you're going against somebody else, and as close to 100% as you can go in that environment. So I think that it's important for those things, but the teams, they're not going to show you everything. They're going to play it really tight because it's so important for success in the regular season, especially early on.
Yeah, and I guess that's the thing that I was curious about is like how much of a physical preparation, practicing the technique, practicing, even simplified versions of the mental reads, I guess, so mental as well. How much of that could you get in a preseason setting versus having to wait for the regular season? And it sounds like it's actually not that much. And I guess really it's not even not that much. It's the difference between that and practice is not that much. And at that point, what kind of risk do you want to take on where there are tackles to the ground and like more randomness into it if you're not actually going to get that much sharper? And also, I think, last night was interesting because you had guys play, the snap counts aren't up yet because we're recording this in the morning and the game didn't end until midnight or whenever it ended. I don't know. I watched the second half back this morning because I sure as heck didn't watch that full thing. I know you were there. So
I was there, yeah.
I got a text from you at 2 a.m. about the podcast today, which I read at 7 a.m. when I woke up this morning. So I know it went pretty late. But point is, like, if we're talking about 20 reps for some guys or 15 reps for some guys, maybe 30, 40, like how much are those 30, 40 reps even valuable over the hundreds of reps that you've stacked in training camp? And at that point, when you look at kind of the scope and size and relativity of all of that, I don't know that you're actually going to be able to move the needle that much. And at that point, you're getting into the risk reward game. And I think the other thing too, later in the preseason, because like the Carolina example, I think is really interesting because my strength coach, Braden, since you brought it up, goes, I would rather ramp into the season. Yeah. But if I have someone who gets hurt earlier in camp or earlier in the preseason, I have more time to go find something else or work out a trade or whatever. Now, if something happens to you, like if, God forbid, Jacoby Brissett was, they said ultimately like he could have gone back into the game last night, but let's say like he gets knocked out. Yes, they would just be like, okay, Drake May's our starting quarterback, but then what do you do down roster? Do you go find another backup? Do you want to bring in another veteran? Like, you don't have a lot of time to do that. As opposed to if it happens in the first week of camp or the first preseason game, you have more time. So that is the explainer as to why I think teams do it, where they have more time to come up with plan B versus, oh crap, cuts are tomorrow. I guess we'll just find someone on the waiver wire. Yeah, no,
100%. And again, I think it's a little bit, people are trying to figure out the right way, the right path. And there is no right answer because like you said, from a physiological standpoint, you want to ramp into the season, right? Kind of have that bye week, get right, and then get rock and rolling. But I think a lot of people look at it and what's comfortable for the players. Like I remember I was talking to Fletch last night on the radio and I was like, would you like to, not play early and then play the one before, like play this third game and then go? And, what he's comfortable with is playing early in the preseason. He's like, I don't want to play the week 1 and week 2 and then take week 3 off. And again, like there's a psychological element to this. And I think like there's a psychological element for the coaches as well, too. Like I'm just comfortable with doing it this way because we've done it this way, since preseason was invented. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of how we've done it, right? It was, a little bit in the first game, like a quarter in the second game, a half in the third game, you're off for the fourth game. And I think there's like a rhythm to that for players mentally. And I think maybe as we get longer into this 3-game preseason structure, I think it'll change. I think guys will say
it's going to change because it ain't going to be 3 for that much longer. They're going to go to an 18-game schedule and go to 2. So which will be fascinating wild. In its own right. Yeah,
which is wild. But yeah, so I think that's what you'll see is something. I think you'll see people fiddle with it just as they fiddle with the practice structure. And I think I can hear fans saying, because I've had this conversation with one of the producers on the shows I was working on last night about how insulated and protected the players are. But ultimately, like this, you're just trying to knock the rust off. Like I consult with a guy for a different team, and one of the things he's like, I don't care how much I play, I just want to get the rust off. Just make sure that I'm in a game setting, I'm tackling, I'm on the ground, I'm off the ground, I'm working off blocks, because there's a little bit different of intensity. Like I can finish a block in a preseason game, and no one's going to say pooey to me about it. Like, so I'll get a hearty hand clasp and good job. If you finish a block in practice, you're going to get cussed out because you're trying to protect your team, right? So I think there is a little bit different intensity to a preseason game, which again is like it's instead of having to climb a mountain, you just kind of take it, it's like climbing Everest. You take it to base camp 1, base camp 2, base camp 3. This is what this is. So, I think this is, I know fans want a more intense, use every opportunity to prepare, but there is a risk reward element here. And I think because of the advantage of keeping stuff close to the vest, because of the health and wellness of your team. Like, if you look at the teams that win the Super Bowl every year, they're the healthiest team. And again, you're working through the season there. And so if you can set yourself up to be successful in that area, you give yourself a shot. So all of these things are in the goal of winning the Super Bowl. And it's just kind of what you prefer in terms of getting there. But don't get it twisted. The preseason is valuable, but it's not valuable maybe for what fans think it's valuable for. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah. I think that's fair for sure. I think for some fans, because fans are not a monolith, Logan. I don't know if you knew that.
That's true. That was different. I shouldn't have said it like that. But the fans that I've talked to maybe don't.
For sure. But I think for some people that are not in the league, there is that is 100% correct in terms of it's not what you think it's for. I think for others, it is exactly what you think it's for. You just might not get the value, the return on investment, if you will, that you think you do, and thus that kind of mitigates the need to actually participate in it. The other big picture piece of the preseason, Logan, and really not the preseason, the whole before the season time, preseason training camp, going back to OTAs, including mini camp and the whole deal, is the job that Adam Peters has over the next insert number of hours till 4 o'clock on Tuesday, depending on when you're listening to this. They've got to come up with a 53. And actually, I'm actually having a Commander's PR double check on this. So we might have an answer by the end of the podcast, or we might not. 53/55, there's a new rule this year that you can immediately put guys on IR. Which I think the way I read that rule is that, and I will shout out, there was someone who sent me an email, actually. You can go to hoffmanshow.com/contact if you'd like to email the show. But send me an email. It was like, hey, I haven't heard anybody mention this yet. But basically, you can put guys straight to IR. So let's say Jordan McGee is going to miss 4 weeks. You just put him on IR, and that he doesn't need to go on the 53, and then you have to wait and hold your breath and hope that no one gets claimed, or tell a guy like, hey, we're going to sign you on Tuesday, and risk that he's like, I'm going to sign today.
I'm sorry to cut you off. Is there a limit on that? Because I was reading that rule also. I didn't understand exactly.
So there's 2 spots, two immediately available IR spots. And so again, the way I've interpreted this, I'm having PR check on this. So hopefully, if we don't get an answer, I literally just got a text back from Sean at Commander's PR saying, let me double check. Because it's a new rule and it's the first time we've all gone through it. But, hopefully by the time that I do a 53-man roster projection on the radio this afternoon, as we record this, that I will actually have an answer to that. So 55, 53, obviously Dan's talked a lot about the 70 because the 17 practice squad spots, which could be 72 because now we're doing all kinds of math, Logan.
Yeah,
the point is there's a lot of different data points. I should stop doing math and get to the point. There's a lot of different data points to consider. And I think what we sometimes do is we take a look at last night and let's say like Martavis Bryant. Fantastic job out of him last night from production standpoint. Draws 2 big PIs, scores a touchdown, shows the big bodiedness of why that body type is valuable. And it's like, he played his way onto the team. Well, he played like 2 quarters of football, and he's got a ton of practice reps, and everyone else has a ton of practice reps. In fact, a ton more than him because he didn't get here until later on in camp. I don't know how much you've talked to various GMs about this, how you think about this. How do you weight the games versus the practices and also kind of the progression over time, right? Because the third preseason game is different than the first one. Like, I want to see a player grow. So if he had a bad first game but a great third game, then that seems like a valid thing to consider. So how do you think that Adam Peters and company and GMs around the league are going about this today as they watch the film and try to decide how to put together their roster?
Yeah, I think you definitely want to make sure you're signing ascending players. I think there's guys who start off really hot, have really good, OTA minicamp phase, and you're like, man, this guy's poised for something big. And then they look a little sluggish, and they never kind of figure out the flame. You know what I'm saying? I think they never kind of ignite the flame. Like I think a good example of that maybe in the preseason this year is Dominique Hampton. Like started off a little bit sluggish. They moved him to linebacker, make some splash plays against Miami, and looks like a dude who's going to be on the 53. And then you get a guy like Tyler Owens who showed signs in rookie minicamp, OTA minicamp, and then all of a sudden he's like crescendoing just at the perfect time to kind of say I deserve to make the roster. So I think that's the main thing you're looking for. And obviously the thing that I've noticed with GMs is like they say they evaluate practice and preseason games equally. That has not been my experience. I think they definitely weigh, going back to the preseason conversation, they definitely weigh the preseason stuff more because it's real. You know, it's real angles, it's real tackles. I think another great example of this is maybe Troy Apke. Like when you watched him in practice, he looked amazing. And then when he got in the game, like all of a sudden those really sharp angles weren't quite as sharp. Those big hits over the middle of the field weren't big hits. They were missed plays. And so that becomes a huge, huge evaluation point in my estimation. And so, so like basically I think it's the preseason games, joint practices, preseason games, how you did in those. And then are you an ascending player? And I think obviously the practice is important, but you got to show it on the field. And I think there's certain guys that do well in the field because you've been in a lot of practices. Certain guys that have done well in practice that haven't done well in the game, and then certain guys that have done well in the game that don't do well in practice. I think the latter in that example are the ones that'll probably end up making a push for the roster.
Yeah, I think it's so tough because there's just so much information at this point. Yeah. And, it's a constant thing. Like I'm sure Adam Peters, we see it in Hard Knocks all the time, right? The GMs have their big giant whiteboards that they then fold up when everyone else is coming in the office because it's their private info. And they might not share that with anybody. They might share that maybe their assistant GM, maybe the head coach, but like they might not want the head coach to know where they're at on the 53 while they're coaching them because they just want the coach to coach them up. And then, like, when it's time to actually make cuts, like today, Adam might open up that board and be like, all right, Dan, here's where I'm at. Yeah. What do you think? For the first time, because there's no more practices or games to coach for Dan before that decision is made. So I don't know that's me throwing out a hypothetical, but I'd imagine some GMs and coaches go about it that way, where others, it's a kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? Collaboration. I was like, conglomeration? No, that's not the right one. A collaboration the entire time. So I think that if I was a GM and I'm looking at it, I definitely would value the game slightly more because I want to ultimately know what it is when the lights are on. Like, how do you handle the pressure, right? Because that is a part of the evaluation. When you're playing fast and playing free, and I thought this was a huge part of the game last night, and we'll talk about this specifically with a couple of players, but DQ talked about it post-game, how at halftime he went in and was like, guys, lighten up. Like he mentioned it during the week last week in the press conference. He's like, I want guys to go out and play loose and play fast and play free, and let's see what happens. And in the first half, guys were tight, and there's drops and there's missed blocks and missed assignments. And in the second half, and by the way, they lost 7-0. There's a talent disparity there because New England's playing their ones, but they lost 7-0. And then the second half, they came out and blasted them because they, one, New England pulled their starters, but two, like they were flying around and guys were making plays. I mean, and I'll shout out one in particular, like Cole Turner in the first half. I do want to talk more specifically about the drops, whether those were on Cole versus the throw, whatever. But he kind of just had a tightness to him. He comes out and makes that sick catch in the second half, and you're like, all right, like that's the Cole Turner we see in practice. That's why a lot of us have been like, damn, I think this guy might have figured it out and might make the team. And so I think that how you perform when the lights are on, what happens when you have to finish plays, like I would weight that more, but it's not everything, which then makes it really hard for us to do projections from the outside. Not that that's going to stop us from doing any kind of 53-man projections in media circles, but it definitely does make it a lot harder.
No, 100%. And so, like I remember this is something I have so much anxiety about still, even to this day. I was in San Fran and you have a bad preseason. I was having great practices, had a bad preseason game, and I was like, I might have just lost my chance at the roster, and it did affect my whole year because I wasn't the preseason games didn't go as well as I'd been hoping they'd go. But I do think it's awesome, and to Dan's point, I think it's really challenging to be like loosen up when you're fighting for 10 roster spots, and that every little mistake, is going to either help or hurt your cause. And so I think like that's as a guy who's been in that situation, like it's incredibly tough. It's incredibly tough to do that. So kudos for Dan for trying to get those guys right. But like those everyone says, oh, these games don't matter. It's not important. But for 10 guys, it does. It's like one of the most important things, right? It's like, it's a thing that's going to, get them on or get them off. And so every little mistake you're looking at, you're like, oh man, is that hurt that guy? Does that, so
for sure.
Interesting dynamic.
For sure. But I guess that's kind of my point, though, is how do you handle that? How do you handle the pressure?
As a player?
Yeah. And as a GM, like I'm evaluating that because if you're a young player, it's one thing if it's you, let's say 2017 San Francisco 49ers, Logan Paulson. I know who you are. You've played in games. You're not going to get nervous. You're probably more nervous for this preseason game than you will be once you're in the regular season because you're like, oh my God, my roster spot's on the line. Yeah. But if you are a young player and you haven't played a ton in the NFL, are you going to freak out when I put you in the game and I need you in week 5 in a key situation against a division rival? Like, I want to know how you handle that pressure versus, another guy if he's out there 100%. Playing fast and free with it on the line. So that's a part of the evaluation. But the other thing too is last night, talk about this only matters for like 10 guys. I thought Tarico made a really great point on the broadcast, which is that the practice squad guys are called up with such frequency now that you can't, if you're out there last night, you can't be thinking about like, oh, I have to just make the 53. Like you got to think about, I got to make the 70 because if I make the 70, there's a really great chance that I'm going to play a couple of times this year at least. And hey, if I play once, maybe I can make some plays and stick around. Like you just don't know. Or if the guy in front of me gets hurt, like I get called up from practice squad and now I'm on the roster for real. So just staying within the Commanders program and instead of thinking it, like this was kind of how I was approaching it last night, is it's not just like 10 guys, 10 spots or whatever available. I guess 34 didn't play, so 19 spots, down to 16 with the specialists, whatever. It's like there's like 5 or 10 guys on the entire 90 man that I was like, sorry, based off how you played so far throughout the summer, I don't think there's any way you can play your way on the practice squad last night. But I'm like 80 guys fighting for 70 spots, if you will. And so I think that changes the equation too, as you make this evaluation and how we kind of look at the preseason and how Adam Peters is looking at the preseason.
No, I think that's a great point. And I think the expanded practice squad is awesome because I think one of the things we were running into, the NFL, the NFL was running into was just, it was hard to develop talent. And so now you've got this great ecosystem where you can develop a guy like Mitchell Tinsley or Bryson Tremaine, or maybe you don't think Wiley is ready for like live action bullets, but he has a couple weeks in the program to kind of learn the offense. And then all of a sudden week 5 or 6, you can bring him up and kind of make a move and kind of keep him in the organization. Same thing with the offensive line. I think it's probably more important for the offensive line because it's such a technical position in terms of like development. So I definitely agree with that assessment. I think that's one of the things I love about the new roster construction is that you have that flexibility to keep a promising guy. Because, before it was like, you're keeping, I forget even what the number was. Was it 8 guys? Is that right? 8?
Yeah, it was like 8. Maybe 8, 10. Like, I think it went from 8 to 10. Yeah, it was not a lot. Not
a lot of guys. And so like, if you didn't make the team, like it was a short rope until you were just gone from the organization. And then, like older veterans that you think have value were also gone. So I think that's another great thing is like, just as an example, like Jamin Davis, I know everyone's talking about him, but there is a reasonable expectation. Like I say, he doesn't make the 53. You want to develop him as an edge rusher. He's still around the program on practice squad, then gets elevated later. And I'm not saying he's going to make it or not going to make it. I'm not, making a declarative statement here, but I think that's a great tool for Adam, and it's awesome because it not only lets you say, hey, hey, we want these guys, but it lets me bring in other talented pieces that I maybe liked from before. So I love that. I love that roster construction tool. And I think it really helps with guys who are borderline, and guys you want to see grow. And it's just awesome to be able to keep more of those guys in the program for development. So.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think of some of the, to double click on the veteran too, like I remember I don't remember what the year was, but the last year that Will Blackman was here and they cut him first to be like, hey, we're going to give you extra time to go try to find a roster somewhere else. Like, I kind of wonder because there were times that year I was like, dang, it'd be really nice to have right now Will Blackman. His other DBs got hurt and stuff like that, where now they might have been like, hey, dude, we don't have space for you on the 53, but like, obviously we're going to cut you. You're if someone else signs you, great. But if not, we want you on the practice squad because they loved Will Blackman in the building as a leader. He was a guy that played, nickel. He played outside. He played safety. And so having that around would have been fantastic and would have helped the development of the younger players. But they literally couldn't put him on the practice squad because the veteran rules didn't exist back then either. So it's not just the expansion to 17 that's huge, but the 4 spots where you can have veterans who have experience is a game changer as well, to have different kinds of guys in the building as you kind of have your entire holistic view of the team, especially in a year, by the way, for Peters and company now, where they're trying to establish a culture and trying to build a foundation. Having some older guys around is probably helpful. By the way, I did get the word back from PR to tie up the loose end real quick before we get into the game. Essentially, that's correct. I was told, you wouldn't necessarily frame it as like you have to go to 55 because it's not like you want to find guys that are on IR. But if you have players that you would in previous years have put on the 53, they have to be on the 53 for one day to then get to IR. That's not the case anymore. You can put them directly on IR, which prevents you from having to cut another player, hope that they don't get claimed somewhere else, and then bringing them back. So essentially, depending on, like let's say a Jordan McGee or Johnny Newton, those are the 2 names that I kind of have in my head, Logan, for depending on how bad their injuries are right now. Those guys could theoretically go to IR with a return designation immediately if their injuries are going to keep them out a couple of weeks once the regular season begins, and that could save a roster spot for 2 other players. "30 minutes in, Logan. Let's talk about the game, shall we? We'll do this position by position, nice and quick, because, again, so much of the hay was already in the barn, but let's roll through it. We'll start with quarterback just quickly. Obviously, Daniels and Mariota don't play. The word on Marcus is that he could have, and they were just super careful because they're trying to get him 100% healthy. No need to go into the season with anything. I think Driscoll showed, his Jeff Driscollness last night. Yeah. I still tend to think they'll probably just keep 2 here. But, I think that he is a valuable guy to have around for sure if you need depth. And I will also quickly, before you give your thoughts, hat tip to Trace McSorley. He played a good game last night, and what a tough situation for him to come into. But that's life when you're on the fringes of the NFL. And I really hope that Trace finds his way onto a practice squad somewhere and can stick around the league because the way he played last night, he deserves that. Yeah, no,
100%. I think Jeff Driscoll is going to be that guy, that veteran player that probably is on practice squad, and I think that'd be great for the organization to keep him around. And if there is an injury or you need him to come up for whatever reason, you can just pull him up for that handful of games. So I think he played well. I think you see some of his limitations and why he's kind of been, that practice squad 3rd quarterback for a lot of teams over the course of his tenure. And again, that's not a knock on him. I think he's got some tremendous physical gifts. I mean, he looks the part, man. He's a big son of a gun.
Big hoss.
Yeah, and but like that dig that he throws to Bryson Tremaine, like I don't know if he could have thrown that ball any harder. And it's like that's where you see kind of the levels of quarterbacking. And I think, and again, like he's a valuable asset. Let's keep him around, but I'm not sure he's warranted like the 53. And that's not a knock on him. I think that's just a numbers thing from a quarterback position, because if it's between him and Tyler Owens making the team for special teams value, like I definitely want Tyler Owens. So,
although I do think Jeff Driscoll is the rare quarterback who could play special teams.
Dude, I think so too, man. He's big. So, I think he played tight end I think in I forget where it was, Arizona or Cincinnati. Maybe, he played tight end for a year. So like he's definitely got a very unique physical skill set.
For sure. Sam Hartman, by the way, still hurt, but I would expect him to make the practice squad as well. Okay, running back, Jeremy McNichols, again, RB3, and I thought he had a pretty good night, and I think there was one run in particular that embodies something that they want, which is the physical toughness. When he gets out on the edge and he lowers his shoulder in the first half on that run, I'm like, that's your staple, just stamping shut. You making the team, sir. I think McNichols is on. Chris Rodriguez was up next, and I think had a couple of nice runs. Had a drop.
Cut the ball well. I think outside of that one drop, but I think had a solid game. Game, let's say.
And then Wiley just continues to produce. So where are we at on the running back position?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see why Jeremy McNichols is maybe that 3rd guy, the veteran savvy, the leadership, the toughness, all that kind of thing. But I think Michael Wiley, like when you watch him run the ball, he's just got a great feel, and it's something that you can't really coach. and he does run the ball hard. He catches the ball well. So that's definitely a guy from an upside play that you're like, how do we figure out a way to keep him around? And, maybe it's practice squad initially, but maybe after a couple weeks, he's your third guy, or he's your first backup for Austin Eckler if he gets hurt, because his skill set leans that way a little bit. So I definitely think he's made a really solid case for himself on the roster over the course of the first 3 preseason games. I don't think it happens initially, but I definitely think it happens sometime this year.
Yeah, I think the beauty of the running back position / the curse of the running back position is, like, if you cut him initially, you're not concerned that he's going to get claimed.
Right.
Would other teams be interested in their practice squad? Absolutely. But is he going to get claimed? Like, someone to put a waiver wire thing on him? No. C-Rod on the wrong end of the numbers here?
Unfortunately, I think so. I mean, as much as I like Chris Rodriguez and he's my guy and I love how he plays the game, I don't think he's shown enough. And, he hasn't really got a ton of opportunities to show. But again, that's how the preseason goes, this is a tough time of year. And I'm not going to say he is cut, but I definitely get the vibe based on his usage and everything like that. There's other people that fit Cliff's vision a little bit more specifically.
Yeah.
So,
and Chris is a guy that's played on special teams. So if they keep multiple running backs on practice squad and want to call him up a week or two like that, I could see that happening for sure.
Yeah.
All right. Biggest thing of wide receiver. Like the most declarative thing, I think, unless there's an injury that we don't know about, Jamison Crowder was inactive. And I know we put him on our 53, but dang, sure seems like Jamison Crowder's making the 53, Logan, because he didn't even suit up and play. They give a lot of opportunities in the punt return game to Kaz Allen, obviously. We'll talk about Kaz. I guess we can kind of talk about Kaz here as we're transitioning from running back to wide receiver, although he's going the other way. But Crowder seems to be a lock because he didn't play. And then we got a bunch of interesting stuff to talk about from the guys that did.
Yeah, so I think you got, Terry, Diami, Ozzie, and Luke didn't play, and then Crowder didn't play. So there's your 5 right there. And I think that's a pretty solid 5. I think they all bring something a little bit different. I think there's some growth potential there for McCaffrey, which is awesome. And that's exactly what you're looking for a 3rd-round pick. And then it's who's going to take that 6th spot. And I don't know if anybody really put anything specifically or declarative on there. Obviously, the guy that I've been kind of touting is Bryson Tremaine. And I don't know if I've seen enough from him in game to warrant that. And again, we talked about the throw on the dig that Driscoll threw, which was a little bit hot and high, and the timing looks a little bit off. There's the out that McSorley throws where it looked a little bit late to me. And again, that's a tough, it's so funny. You're signaling all this stuff, and I understand you're getting pressure off the left side there, so you signal it out. I think a slant would probably have been better versus the cornerback position, but again, that's a conversation for another day. Tinsley, I don't know if he's shown enough to kind of warrant anything. And then obviously Martavius Bryant, Rosemy-Jack-Saint. I mean, Rosemy-Jack-Saint is slowly coming along. Again, he had a good game today, but in practice has been a little bit quiet. So this is really, to me, this is a Larry Izzo, who do you want type of thing from a special team standpoint. Byron Pringle's another guy that I think has done a good job returning kicks. So really flip a coin here. I think the good thing about it is I think whoever they do not sign to the 53, they could probably easily get the practice squad at this point. So that includes Bryant, despite him scoring a touchdown in this game. So,
yeah, it is. It's really interesting because I feel like some of the guys that have made plays aren't teams guys, and that makes it difficult.
Harder.
Like Bryant last night, really, really good job of showing why he's intriguing, right? He draws 2 PIs. He's got the big slant on the touchdown where he just is a huge body, huge target, and shows the physicality where you're like, hell yeah, let's get that guy on the football team. But you can't have a 6th receiver who doesn't play teams. It's just not functional. But on practice squad, you can. And that way, all of a sudden, if, let's say, Diami, strains a calf and is out 2 weeks, okay, let's call up Martavius Bryant off practice squad and have him play receiver, and not teams. That's valuable. And that's kind of again, these new practice squad rules are so helpful in that way. But ultimately, on a week-in, week-out basis, the guys that you want to have in your team selection, if you will, you need them to do the things that you need. and special teams in that spot is going to be huge. And so I don't know what they do with that 6th spot.
I don't know either.
Jack Saint makes a good play last night. I honestly think that I put Pringle in right now. One, that seems smart based off of he was the first guy out there. I mean, he's the one who caught the ball in the first possession that got called back. I would have loved to see a replay of that, by the way. I find a hard time believe that he was out of bounds still when Driscoll threw that ball, but maybe he was.
No, anyway, it's first to touch when he's out of bounds.
Right, but if Driscoll's holding the football when he's out of bounds, he's allowed to come back in, and then he throws it. Like, the ball has to be in the air.
No, like if the receivers, that's a really interesting way to word that. That's like something my dad would bring up from a rule standpoint. But if you step out of bounds, then you're the first to receive the football, even if the quarterback's holding it, it's a penalty. So, what? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you're just out for the rest of the play?
Yeah.
Like he might as well just sit down?
Sit down. That's been a coaching point. If you step out of bounds, sit, like, don't go back in the field because you don't want the quarterback to throw you the football because it's a loss of down. So it's like a really significant penalty. So like in like short red zone, like 5 yard and in on scramble drill, like defensive backs are coached to push you out of bounds. And so you'll see
the way it's worded is the first to touch it. You can't be the first to touch it if someone else is currently holding the ball.
Correct. And so that's I've never heard that articulated that way before, but in practice, because we talk about this a lot, especially in that low red area, like do not get pushed out of bounds. Do not step out of bounds.
There's no reestablishing.
No reestablish. Right. It's not downing a punt, right? You can reestablish on a punt, but on a reception or you can't even reestablish on a punt like that.
No, well that's the thing that's why I thought it was the way it was. Now we're totally sidetracked, but I think people are learning something, so it's fine. That or they're laughing at me. There's two groups of people. There are people that are learning something and people that are laughing at me. Because on a punt, the ball is in the air almost immediately. And so while it's in the air, if you go out and come back in, like just don't be the one to touch it. If you went out of bounds, typically you wind up with 7 of your teammates around, be like, hey guys, I went out. Someone else want to touch the football? Right. It's sitting on the ground. My least favorite penalty probably in the entirety of the sport when someone does that. So I always thought the first one to touch it, you can't be touching it, or you can't be the first one if someone else is holding the ball while you're out of bounds. But now I know because you were coached otherwise. So someone should have coached me.
Absolutely. So that's why it's a frustrating rule for that, but I understand why it's that's interesting that you picked up on that though, like because the quarterback is holding the ball. Anyway, funny.
The point is that Byron Pringle, because he plays special teams and is
I think he's a good receiver.
I think he's probably the 6th wide receiver. Okay, tight ends. This is really interesting because Cole Turner, again, like some tough looks. I don't know. I haven't had a chance to watch the L22 and didn't get a feel for it as much as I'd like to live. Are those 2 drops on him? Like the first one's just a really tough play. Good play by the defender. The second one, it's like, hey man, like you gotta catch that. But also if he sat and Driscoll threw as if he was going to keep going, like that is a tough catch. And Driscoll's not, again, his touch isn't exactly receiver friendly.
Yeah.
He also picks up the holding penalty.
Yeah.
So that's not good. But he has the monster catch later in the game. He has some other nice blocks throughout. Like, where are we at on Cole Turner? And then I have another guy I want to ask you about.
Yeah, so the out I thought was just like a miscommunication, and you see that like throughout the preseason. Like it's hard for quarterbacks to have chemistry with all these guys, because if you think about it, like even the dig to Bryson Tremaine, he's had more reps with Marcus Mariota than he's had with Jeff Driscoll in practice. He probably had more reps with Jaden Daniels than he's had with Jeff Driscoll. So like getting that timing is really it can be challenging. And then on that zone read, like I understand why Cole sat down, but I also understand why Jeff threw the ball out. And so it's like that's something you'd go back. You'd like to get that rep in practice and be like, hey, like, how you seeing that? What do you want me to do? And he's like, I'd prefer you run out. Then next time you know what to do. And then the seam ball, I don't know if that's anybody's fault. I think the DB's in good position. I think you probably want to think back shoulder there and let Cole work for you a little bit. But again, like that's a chemistry relationship thing between the quarterback and the receiver that comes with like a tremendous volume of reps. And that's why we talk about, every offseason, like Terry and the chemistry with the quarterback. It's just hard to build because you need a lot of time on task. So I don't know. I have an interesting. If they wanted to keep Cole, I think he's played hard enough. He's played physical enough. He's played with enough urgency to warrant that. But I also could see the argument for them being like, hey, you're on practice squad. Like we have other positions we want to prioritize because we're worried about depth on the O-line or whatever. So I don't really have a good feel. I think in terms of play, like there's been a little bit of inconsistency catching the ball. But I think the other stuff has improved so dramatically that he looks like he could play on Sundays from a physical standpoint, which is something that he couldn't do, prior. It's something that was in question prior to this year.
For sure. The other guy's Yankoff. And you mentioned this last week, like the way he's played on teams.
He's an animal.
And I feel like he's done some nice stuff as a tight end, like blocking. I think he had a catch last night as well, if I remember correctly. So, like, are we looking at the whole backdoor Colson Yankoff roster spot potentially as tight end 4 here because of his special teams value?
That's the thing that I keep coming back to with him is like he's a special athlete, and he does cover kicks. He covers kicks like a linebacker, but he plays on offense. Like he plays with this relentless abandon on teams. Like he had a great tackle covering a kick last night, and again, like the athletic upside, the rawness there, the growth potential as your 4th guy, I think maybe that's the move you want to go. A guy that, because you're looking at skill sets that could replace, Zach Ertz potentially, right? And he's a guy that moves really well, has a good feel, former quarterback. So I definitely think that is a possibility for sure. If you want that 4th guy to play teams, like who's played better special teams? Colson Yankoff. Like he's probably through the preseason, probably like a top 6 or 7 special teams guy for me. So he's close from a special teams standpoint. And I think he's developing as a tight end. If he had started in the game earlier, I'd say for sure. But again, like there just seems to be a little bit of indecision about like, Cole seemes to be ahead of him just from like the playtime stuff in the game.
Yeah. And Cole did a nice job on teams as well. It's funny. I remember second week of camp, they were doing like a kind of corral the ball carrier drill on teams on punt coverage, and they executed that drill. Like that drill came to life in the game last night. And Cole was one of the guys who did a really nice job of, I'm not going to fly down the field and try to make the big hit and wind up missing and, flying past the punt returner. It was like, no, it was him and Walker, the linebacker, like perfectly corralled the punt returner. And you're like, that is excellent stuff. That's the kind of stuff that you pay attention to. And as a coach, you get really jazzed about of a guy executing the plan. So, I think the tight end is going to be really interesting. And I think both those guys could probably get to practice squad. So that is something to consider as well. We keep putting all these guys on practice squad. Someone's got to make the 53. Someone's going to actually make it.
But I think that's like, this is why it's tough, is because like nobody was like, I deserve the 50. That's the thing about it, is you're hoping that someone says declaratively. I think we're going to get to it on linebacker here in a second, but there's nobody that's like, oh my God, this guy, he deserves it. We can't. Like Tyler Owens, like there's no doubt in my mind he's making it because of all the stuff he's done, right? Even Michael Walker, is that the linebacker's name? Yeah. Absolute maniac. Like he's gonna make it. That's what you're hoping.
KJ Henry's the other one that I had noted at that.
100%. Like those guys are going to make the team. Like there's no doubt in my mind because they absolutely played like maniacs the entire preseason. And I think we were hoping that one of those receivers would do that. One of the running backs, I think, you could argue that Michael Wiley did that, and that's why we're in that conversation there. And then from a tight end standpoint, nobody said, like, if Cole catches 3 passes last night and blocks the way he did, he's on the roster. But again, there's a little bit of indecision. So I think that's why this is so tough, because nobody declaratively was like, I am your guy. I'm the one you want. So that's why it's tough.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. O-line. One thing that caught our eye for sure, or caught my eye, and then I'm glad that some other people clarified this. Trent Scott was on the inactive list, and I was like, whoa, he's that on the roster? Right. And then apparently he's got an injury of some kind that he's picked up. So he had a big old brace on his leg. So that becomes interesting of like, what is that injury situation? And that, of course, sometimes we find out when guys get put on season-ending IR when the roster's announced that they got hurt in practice on Friday and nobody ever knew about it. So, that is one that initially I was like, okay, well, that certainly, I thought he was on, but I didn't know he was that on. Right. But anything in particular stand out last night along the offensive line?
Yeah, I think the main thing as you talk about guys like seizing opportunities is how Chris Paul has developed at offensive tackle.
I agree.
I think that's the one that really sticks out to me. Like there was a period of time where we were talking about him on the show, and it was like probably a 6-play sequence, and just how much better he's gotten in pass pro over the course of these 3 weeks since the preseason started has just been really impressive to me. And, he's always a guy that I thought was a little bit robotic in his pass set, but watching him take vertical sets, watching him jump, watching him use his length, the strength of his hands. And again, he's going against, the third pass rusher for New England. But I was like, man, like maybe that works in a game. Maybe that's the guy that you feel good about. And his tremendous power on the inside also is something that is really valuable too. So he's playing really good ball. I always get nervous when a guy comes in as a guard and then is moved to a different position, because it's like, maybe we like these other guards in here, because if you wanted him to play guard, he would play guard, but I do think he's a guy, like when you just look at play, I don't know how he's not on the team. However, there's more than just play that's involved in this. There's the meeting room, there's all this stuff, but he's a guy that each game I've come away just impressed, like with his physicality, his technicality, and his improvement. Like,
I feel like he's done well in practice too. Like,
and so it's weird because he's playing tackle, and I don't think of him that way. So I'm always like, it's always like when they take the third string guard and they move him to center in like the third week of preseason, you're like, ooh, he's probably not making the team because he's not playing guard anymore. They're moving him to a new spot. Like, so it's weird, but I definitely think from a play standpoint, he deserves it. So
yeah. Speaking of Stromberg, like, dude was a 3rd round pick last year, right?
Yeah, 3rd round
Yikes,
pick,
bro.
And he might be a good practice squad candidate, but that's the other frustrating thing. I think the closest guy to kind of establishing like I deserve this swing guard spot is Good Jones, like just from a consistency and physicality standpoint. But nobody really was like, I am the guy.
Yeah, I don't think Dieter, like, he had a couple misses last night. Like, dude.
Yeah, so I think it's, in talking with other people that follow the team closely, no one in the building, obviously, it's just like maybe the depth's just not that great there. And maybe the depth's different if Chris Paul's there. Who knows? But it's that middle after the first 3 is a little bit uncertain, which is
a little
tough.
bit concernicus, Logan. A little bit concernicus. Concernicus. Okay. Defensively, a guy that we probably overthought of when we were doing our. Actually, let's start on the D line. We'll get to corner in a second. There was stuff that was happening at corner immediately. So for some reason, corner's at the top of my notepad, and it really belongs down further. D line. I think Big Phil and John Ridgway both were awesome last night. I don't think that's stunning analysis as they were making plays that everyone could see. But I think they've locked up their spots. I think KJ Henry, not only did he play well, I saw them line him up at 3 technique and some 3rd down stuff. So you're like, oh, okay, we got some versatility. Look at that. And then you're talking about guys like Jamin, John Baptiste, Andre Jones. Where are we at on the final few defensive line spots?
Well, I think like you said, it's KJ Henry for sure. Like, I don't even know if that was like in question going in, but he definitely like kind of solidified himself. Like he's a good football player. Like, he's just strong, he's smart, he's instinctive. Like, that showed up a lot last year. I think the interesting conversation, I had it as Jamin kind of making that 5th spot, but I think Jean Baptiste, man, has come on strong in these last 2 games and played physically on teams. He's shown up in the run game. He's created some pressures. And I know they drafted him, 7th round pick, so it's not, neither here nor there. But, I was talking to Ben Standing, and he was like, usually you if you bring someone in, that's the guy that makes it, if it's close. And I do think there's something there. And obviously, James done a great job developing as a defensive lineman. But I do think Jean Baptiste has made a really compelling push here, though, over these last 2 preseason games.
If they let Jamin go, do you think someone would claim him, whether as an edge or a linebacker, and be like, we liked him coming out. Like, we're just forget all this edge rusher stuff. Like, we're going to put him at linebacker because we think he can play there.
I think so. I think he played well enough last year to warrant a shot at that. You know what I mean? And like, there are teams that are really thin at linebacker, and they'd love to have an athletic guy like him doing that. So I think it'd be tough to get him to practice. I personally think, and maybe my read on him is so different than what the rest of the league is, but I do think he'd get a shot someplace.
Yeah, like I think they would love to. I think here they would love to bring him back and continue developing him as that project pass rusher. And a couple weeks in, let's see how it goes. But he's also, he started playing teams and doing stuff like that. So who knows? I think that's probably the toughest call. And who knows what they do with the numbers? Do they go with an uneven roster? I think that's a possibility too. Of like, we had all these positions on offense. We're like, I don't know. They could probably get the guy to practice squad. Do they go with like 24, 23 on offense, knowing they can call guys up week over week and keep 11 defensive linemen? Like, I think that's possible. Linebacker, Walker, check. Yeah. Good job, dude. You're on the team. Dominique Hampton playing a lot of linebacker in this game as well. Not that I think his spot's at risk, just they're moving him around, trying to find a role for him. I thought that was interesting. And I think, we talked about the veterans coming in and guys that we assumed like, hey, that's a vet, they brought him in. Like, I think Pittman's in trouble.
But I don't know who else would take his spot, though. That's the thing. Is like,
I think Walker. I think you go, unless McGee's hurt.
Yeah, I think that's the thing I'm looking at there is like I think McGee, we were talking about him being on the short-term IR situation, like or whatever that the 4-week IR thing.
Yeah.
I think if that's the case, I think Anthony Pittman makes it. If not, though, I do think I agree with you. I think Walker's just it's not an indictment of Pittman because he had a really good game against the Jets, but I think you just see the upside of a guy like Walker, the way he runs, the way he hits, the way he can cover. It's a little bit better than Pittman, who again is a good downhill kind of. If this was 2010, man, he'd be the guy because you run the ball a little bit more. But the game's changed a little bit, so.
For sure. All right. And then we get to corner. So Michael Davis is a guy that we left off our last 53. And we were talking before the show, and we're like, that was probably pretty dumb of us.
Yeah.
Because realistically, like if one of the two top guys, BSJ or Forbes, isn't out there, who's the next best outside corner? It's Michael Davis, even if he's a step down from those two guys. So he's inactive, meaning he's going to make it unless there's an injury that we don't know about, and that's why he's inactive. But anybody else on the corner side? Because I think – Noah Igbenogany, who we both were like lock. He had a rough one last night. Had some good moments as well. Like showed some sure tackling at times.
Yeah.
Where like Chigozie Anuzium has a couple of plays where you need solid tackles in the 2 minute. Like let's keep that guy in bounds,
right.
and you don't execute the time score situation stuff. So I think that's an interesting one. And in some ways, I think putting Davis back on almost cleans up that position where, there's a couple guys, Tariq Castro-Fields, who was solid enough last night, Anusium, et cetera, that were fighting for a last spot that I think actually probably belonged to Michael Davis all along.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. I think, Mike Sanders, still Benjamin St. Juste, Michael Davis, Emmanuel Forbes. I think Noah does make it because he's just physical. And then I think Castro-Fields probably. I think if he's been good the last couple of weeks, and I think he deserves that opportunity. So as much as I was in on Chig, I think Chig showed a little bit of his youth last night, and I think that there's nothing wrong with that. He's a young player, so put him on practice squad, let him develop. Like again, he's got the physical skill set, but I don't know if he's ready yet. But I think Castro-Fields did a great job, so good for him. I think he probably gets that spot solidified.
I do wonder on the Drake May touchdown that got called back, though, who busted coverage that left Derek Forrest all alone trying to make a hero play, which he unfortunately not. Fortunately, New England's offensive line doesn't know how to line up, so that's nice. Safety position's the last one. I kind of think all the relevant parties make it. Like Butler doesn't wind up playing last night, so he's clearly safe.
Yep.
Defoe, Tyler Owens is the first guy out there. I think Tyler Owens is more than safe. Showed up on teams, showed up on defense, sure tackling. Like love that as a last line of defense.
Jeremy Reeves and then, too. I thought had a good game last night.
Reeves has been Jeremy Reeves, inconsistent defensively, incredible on special teams, but inconsistent in that he makes plays and then will miss a tackle here or there.
Sure.
And then Defoe is kind of the wild card there, and those are the last spots.
Yeah, I don't know about Defoe, but again, like when you're looking at numbers, what is it? It's Quan, Chin, Percy, Tyler Owens, Jeremy Reeves as 5, and so do you keep a 6th? And I think that comes down to like what you do with Jamin on the defensive line, probably more than anything.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. Cade York made his kicks.
Yeah.
We might actually put an actual kicker in the TBD line.
That ball flies off his leg, man. It flies off his leg.
Well, he was a 4th round pick for a reason.
Yeah.
He also got traded and cut for a reason, but that was why. The last guy, I want to circle back to Kaz Allen real quick, because I had opened up, Nikki and Sam's projection in the post, and they've got Kaz Allen on as a running back. I don't see it, to be honest. I think that the kickoff return stuff, like I get it. I get the idea of Kaz Allen. Yeah. I just don't like. He hasn't actually made any plays. He's been close on a couple, but he hasn't actually made any plays. And at some point, if you're going to be that gadget guy and that explosive person, like it just kind of is apparent that you are amongst the best athletes on earth, a different level. And I haven't seen that from him in 2 years, nevertheless, this year.
Yeah, I think that's something I come back to as well. And I think, Kaz has done a lot of really good things in practice and in games like you said, there hasn't been that kind of light bulb switch. And, like guys flash, like Tyler Owens flashes, right? And like you've been a part of preseasons where there's a dude in practice that just has a different gear. And I think Kaz, while being very athletic and fast, has not shown that to me just yet. And that doesn't mean he's not going to make it. I'm not saying that Nicky and Sam are wrong, but I think he's on the outside looking in right now, just because I don't know if he's better than a guy, some of the receivers that we talked about. So I think, again, put him in that same bucket with Bryson Tremaine and Mitchell Tinsley and Kaz Allen. Like, I think they're good football players. I don't know if their superpower is enough to warrant them being on the roster.
And I think one thing with him, too, that I worry about transitioning to the running back position is the vision. Like the NBC, you obviously couldn't see this because you were doing your job on the sideline, but NBC had kind of like an all-22 cam on kickoff returns, in part because they wanted to be able to see the entire return as the quarterback or as the kicker was kicking with the new rule. And so there's on one of the kickoff returns, you're just like, man, there seems like there's more space over there. And I don't know what the call is, whatever, but it doesn't display like this supernatural vision. He runs in the back of a dude. And by the way, that dude was Cole Turner, who probably could have had a better block. So there is that. Anything else to tack on to this now hour-long podcast, Logan?
Yeah, no, not really. I mean, I think, again, like I have to say this every time because I was this guy. These bottom of the roster guys, this is a tough week, tough couple days. So our hearts go out to you. And, if you do make it, congratulations. If not, keep plugging away and hopefully something clicks for you soon. So.
Absolutely. And I will add this very shortly. Like, I think this is great for the league, the expanded roster spots, because Tirico or Chris Collinsworth last night on the broadcast was like, the dream's going to die for a lot of guys tomorrow. Yeah. And I was like, that's true, but it's a lot less guys than it used to, because by carrying 70 during the regular season, as opposed to 60, like that's, do the math, 30 teams, 10 extra guys, like that's 300 extra jobs and 300 guys for whom 100%. They will be a part of the NFL year round, as opposed to having to wait, work out, hope they get that call for a tryout, and then try again on a 90-man starting next spring. So I love that the NFL has done this. It's good for the game. It's good for the development of players. It's good for a lot of different stuff. That said, it's still tough. It's a rough 24 hours to find out if you're going to make a practice squad, all that kind of stuff. So best of luck to everybody, and good luck, Adam, on making these decisions, because although you'd rather be the one with the power and the secured contract of whatever the heck Adam Peters is making as a general manager in the NFL, it's still a tough gig. All right. I will do a 53-man roster projection on the Hoffman Show. So if it is before 4 o'clock on Monday, you can tune in and you can hear it. And if it's after 4 o'clock on Monday and our show has already started, or I guess after 7 o'clock and our show has ended, then we have the Hoffman Show podcast, and you can go check it out that way. We'll put it up on YouTube as well, at the Team 980, at Craig Hoffman. Of course, you can check out this show at 106.7 The Fan as well. And that's all the places you can find all the things. For Logan, who you can also watch on Command Center on the Commander's YouTube page, I'm Craig Hoffman, and we'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.